Good morning. This is Ron. It is Tuesday, August the 14th. Welcome to Story Time. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes a presumption for the status quo. And I'm speaking to all you butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And one of the things I wanted to cover was the political theater and how often that takes place. Every time you hear a politician, right, left, or center, on the radio, on television, you need to listen carefully to what they're saying, and you need to listen for political theater. Politicians love to make it sound and look like they're doing something big. They're taking a profound position on a particular issue and not really do so. They don't want to have to face the consequences. They don't want if you take a position on anything, one way or another, you put yourself in the position of, first of all, from a voter standpoint, is you cut down on the number of potential voters. You also cut down on the number of potential um, donors, not only to your campaign, but to your political party. If you go ahead and take a position, if you're, let's say, abortion. So if you're anti-abortion, then you're going to alienate the pro-abortion voters. If you are pro-abortion, you're going to alienate the anti-abortion voters. You can't get money from those, and there's no middle ground. There's no in between. Abortion is a topic that's very hard, if not impossible, to finesse, to play political games with, to do gamesmanship, to uh, involve in political theater. And what I mean by political theater is most best illustrated by what Newt Gingrich, former Speaker, disgraced former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, did in 1994. The Republicans hadn't run the House of Representatives for 40 years, for the previous 40 years. It was always run by the Democrats. And now, all of a sudden, in the late 80s, early 90s, and this is usually seems the way that power changes hands is when the party in power gets to the point where they get so arrogant that they overstep. They basically trip themselves up and hurt themselves. It isn't so much that the other party becomes so strong that they take over outright. It is that the party in power becomes so arrogant and corrupt and whatnot that they end up allowing the other party to take power. And that's what happened here in 1994. The Black Caucus in the Democrat Party wanted more members. Okay, the only way to get more members is to have more blacks elected to Congress. The best way to have more blacks elected to Congress is to racially gerrymander. That means to divide up districts by race and have more, so you can have more black districts. More black districts, more black representatives. Okay, so far so good. However, what everybody knew was that if you go ahead and gerrymander by race, particularly by blacks, you're going to, yes, have more black representatives, but you're going to end up giving away the Democrat majority in Congress because, as well as creating more black districts, you're also going to create more Republican districts. And in so doing, you're going to put the Republicans in charge of the House. So that's what was going on in 1994. Okay, is that there was a lawsuit over this about racial gerrymandering and whether or not the Black Caucus could go ahead and gerrymander the districts like that. The Democrat Party itself was against it, but they wouldn't come out and say so publicly for obvious reasons. The lawsuit was settled in favor of the Black Caucus. The courts basically said it's a political issue, and they can divvy them up the whatever way they see fit. Okay, the Democrats or whoever happens to be in charge of that. So the Black Caucus is free to go ahead and continue to racially gerrymander, which they did, and the Republicans were all set in the November election of 1994 to win the House for the first time in 40 years. Now, the problem here for the Republicans is that what's in essence happening is the Republicans are backing into power. Now, there's something in politics known as a mandate. Okay, and if the Republicans' mandate is basically that if you've been given a mandate, it's like being given a green light. It's one thing to get elected to office; it's another thing to be able to legislate. And you don't want to legislate unless you have a mandate, the approval of the um, in other words, if you back into power, you have no mandate. Nobody is really nobody's voted for you in office because they want your programs, because they want your potential legislation, your bills, your laws. Okay, so here's the Republican Party about to be in power for the first time in 40 years, but without a political mandate. So basically, it would mean they're a lame duck. It would mean that they were neutered, they were flaccid and infertile, and all that good stuff. Okay, that they could not legislate. They really couldn't exercise any power without a mandate. So the question is how to create a mandate. Well, Newt Gingrich and perhaps a couple of his buddies or whatever came up with this idea. They called it the Contract with America. Okay, so first thing they did was to indicate to the voting populace that despite what the newspapers were saying, that the election was still up for grabs. So by saying, if you elect us, not, but if you elect us and put us in the majority, okay, and then the second part was to create a promise. Then we will bring up for a vote the following 10 items. They had a 10-item list. So they went ahead and did this and promoted it and promoted it and promoted it and promoted it. Of course, in November, the Republicans are swept into power. Now, the Republicans, even though technically they didn't have a mandate, they backed into power and everybody knew it. But because of the contract with America, they could claim to have a mandate. And they, much to their credit, they probably could have gone ahead and just done whatever they wanted to, ignore the contract with America and go do something else, because the whole thing was, like I said, theater anyhow. But much to their credit, they went ahead and followed through, and they brought all 10 items up for a vote. 9 of the 10 passed. It was unbelievable. It was a juggernaut. There was no doubt. I mean, it was a thunderous change in Washington. The Democrats were on their heels. They were beside themselves and didn't know what to do. They were completely befuddled. But again, the point is that it was all. So when you hear about 1994 and the contract with America, political theater. The Republicans got into power because they backed into power. But they used political theater tools and techniques to convince people that they had power that they didn't actually have. I know it's skillfully done, and I applaud Newt Gingrich for doing it. I mean, you're going to pull a fast one, at least do it well, So, and he did. And again, I can't complain too much, even though I don't like deception, being deceived, and practicing trying to deceive people. Technically, he didn't, because he went through. He followed through, and he kept his promise. Okay, he brought the 10 items up for a vote, and again, like I said, passed 9 of them. But the point is that you're going to hear with a lot of politicians, a lot of political theater. They get on Sean Hannity, they get on Rush Limbaugh, primarily on Sean Hannity and other shows, and they will make it sound as though they back certain ideas or bills or whatnot. And if you listen carefully, they're really non-committal. They'll come out and say, "Oh, well, I hate crime." Well, so what? What does that mean? You know, this is ridiculous. Well, again, what does that mean? They'll make a lot of vague statements, but they'll do it with a lot of outrage in their voice, a lot of emotion, and they're playing a kind of psychological game. The idea is to make it seem as though they're on your side. The ideal politician would be somebody that everybody thinks is on their side, whether they're socialist or they're a conservative, because that way the politician is going to get the maximum amount of votes, maximum amount of um, um, income, donations. That was the word I was looking for. So part of the reason I'm looking at this in terms of, or this came up, was a few months ago there was a guy that went to Sweden and went to a city in Sweden where they have a Muslim population in a certain section of that city, and it was called a no-go zone. You can't. Police weren't welcome there. Anybody that was not Muslim was not welcome in that part of the city. So he takes his camera and brings a crew, and they go to there and they wander around the city, and they get thumped around. They didn't get beat up real bad, but they got thumped around. And what are you doing? Turn off your camera, all that kind of crap, right? So then he comes back to the United States and says, "Wow, wow! Oh, look at this! This is outrageous! This is completely, this is unbelievable! Look at the crap that's going on here with this Muslim no-go zone, and they're trying to take my camera away, and they're going to beat me up, and I feared for my life. I thought I might be killed." But when you stop and think about it, you realize that this is more political theater. That these people, although they act as though they're innocent bystanders that just happen to blunder into this no-go zone, that they knew what was happening there. They knew what was going on, and they went into the no-go zone for the express purpose of picking people off. They did it intentionally. Why? Money. This guy, it was part of some sort of an organization, a right wing organization. This guy that had the camera and whatnot, this pseudo journalist or pseudo news reporter guy, and he did it, I'm sure, so that he can send out emails to all of his supporters and say, "Oh, look at how horrible and awful and evil and wicked things. Look at all these evil, wicked things that are going on in Sweden. We don't want them to happen in the United States. You need to send money to me so that we can lobby our congressmen, et cetera, et cetera." And also, of course, to get votes for this particular cause. Excuse me. So, again, that's a political theater situation. I don't mind. Again, if it's a legitimate news issue, and I don't mind getting outraged over something that's legit. Somebody's minding their own business, and somebody else comes along and violates their rights. That's outrageous, and I'm perfectly willing to get emotionally upset about it, and maybe even go out and take action, write letters, send money, or whatever. What I don't want is to be manipulated and psychologically manipulated. And that's exactly what goes on with political theater. Okay, it's basically psychologically manipulating your audience for your own political and perhaps financial gain. So it's one thing that everybody needs to be on the alert for. Listen carefully to what's being said, whether it's on the radio or television, particularly by politicians. Is this politician taking the stand that it at first blush sounds like they're taking? Or is there a lot of wiggle room in what they're saying? And if there is, then we're all being had. This is somebody that's trying to con you. So when I come back, a little bit of Ayn Rand. And thank you very much. And let's see. Oh, it's the Ayn Rand Lexicon, and it's a book. It's basically a glossary of terms that Ayn Rand has uses in a lot of her books, and it's a gold mine. If you don't, if the book I would recommend that you read is called Philosophy Who Needs It as a starter on Ayn Rand. But if you don't want to be bothered to get into something like that, then the next best thing is the Ayn Rand lexicon. It's a thick book. It's like reading a dictionary, but it really every entry packs a huge punch. It's really rich. This one entry is called Automation. All learning involves a process of automation, i.e., of first acquiring knowledge by fully conscious, focused attention and observation, then of establishing mental connections which make that knowledge automatic, instantly available as a context, thus freeing man's mind to pursue further, more complex knowledge. The function of psychological integrations is to make certain connections automatic so that they work as a unit and do not require a conscious process of thought every time they are evoked. A mind's cognitive development involves a continual process of automation. For example, you cannot perceive a table as an infant perceives it, as a mysterious object with four legs. You perceive it as a table, i.e., a man made piece of furniture serving a certain purpose belonging to a human habitation, etc. You cannot separate these attributes from your sight of the table. You experience it as a single, indivisible percept. Yet all you see is a four legged object. The rest is an automized integration of a vast amount of conceptual knowledge, which at one time you had to learn by bit. The same is true of everything you perceive or experience. As an adult, you cannot perceive or experience in a vacuum. You do it in a certain automized context, and the efficiency of your mental operations depends on the kind of context your subconscious has automized. The status of automized knowledge in his mind is experienced by man as if he had a direct, effortless, self evident quality and certainty of perceptual awareness. But it is conceptual knowledge, and its validity depends on the precision of his concepts, which requires as strict a precision of meaning, i.e., as strict a knowledge of what specific reference they subsume as the definitions of mathematical terms. It is obvious what disasters will follow if one automizes errors, contradictions, and undefined approximations. And I particularly like that one. It is because, again, all of life, and particularly knowledge, is foundational. You start with the bottom thing and things at the bottom and work your way up. And you become your reasoning and your conceptual and abilities and abstractions become more and more complex. Okay, and so this is where she's dealing with the foundational ideas of automation. They've also have her next one is called axiomatic concepts, and also an entry on axioms, which is axiomatic concepts and axioms are denied by the left. The left pretends they don't exist. And axioms are kind of interesting things in that they are real, but they cannot be proven. 1 plus 1 equals 2 is an axiom. It can't be proven. There have been mathematicians who have tried to do so. They wrote a book, thousands of pages, trying to prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2. And it can't be done. It's real, but you can't prove it. And the left will use that trick where they will try and trick you into proving an axiom. Axioms are obvious, like reality. Reality is axiomatic. So what they'll say is, well, how do we know? Well, we know by the evidence of our senses. Okay, now if they try to argue about it, then they have to be called a liar. If it's axiomatic, it means everybody knows, sees, and understands it, this thing, reality, immediately and completely. So anybody who questions it is simply a liar. There can be no other thing. Okay, so when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the game theory. Thank you very much. Game theory. So now what we're getting to with this game theory a lot, we're talking about in game theory the different types of games that can be played. Prisoner's Dilemma, the what is the other one called? It's the roommate game, stuff like that. Now we're getting down to the payoff. Why? Because when you're reading the beginning, you're thinking, so what? Okay, roommate game, prisoner's dilemma, so what? So what? So what? So what? Okay, now we start getting into payoffs. Why the left is fascinated with games and game theory. This is called environmental policy and cooperation. International cooperation on environmental protection is like the roommate game writ large. Each country prefers to remain passive while the others adopt costly abatement technologies to reduce CO2 emissions. A way out of this free rider problem is to sign an international treaty that legally commits countries to pay monetary fines if their CO2 emissions are in excess of mutually agreed limits. However, it has been difficult to get the major polluters, China, India, and the USA, to ratify such an international treaty. Why is it so hard to secure an international agreement on curbing emissions when it is beneficial for all? While cooperation would be good for all, the outcome most preferred by the USA is for other countries to sign an international treaty with monetary fines while the USA does not. It's always sweet to get a free ride. One way to view environmental activism is an effort to change the social norms. Political pressure can impose a cost on politicians who do not support environmentally friendly policies. This can change the payoffs of the nation's policymakers, just like the moral cost of guilt changed the payoffs in the roommate game. Political pressure can potentially lead to a better outcome if it creates an equilibrium where countries cooperate. So, again, there you go with the environmental situations, and what they're basically describing is techniques for going ahead and using guilt, basically, is what they're advocating to people. Use guilt as a way of gaining other people's cooperation with whatever it is that you want done. Assuming, of course, that whatever it is that you want done is part of leftist dogma, uh, quote unquote, environmental policy. Whenever you hear somebody talking about the environment, by the way, you need to remember that there is no such thing. There's no such thing as the environment. Okay, what there is property. That's the way it is. Everything is property. It is either private property or it is public property. You've got most of the oceans are basically public property. Now, within a certain distance, 3, 4 miles or something like that, from the coastlines of various countries, that's the property of that particular country. Property is also about what borders are about. Okay, it helps to define who has what property, and part of the property is authority and responsibility. The people who live in the United States are responsible for what goes on in the United States. People in Mexico are responsible for what goes on in Mexico, and the difference is the border. So, um, like I said, so there's no such thing as the environment. And that's what they're basically trying to do here is use quote unquote environmental policy in order to make one world and one world government. So we do away with all the borders. Everybody would, I guess, just wander around, migrate rather than emigrate or immigrate. And again, they're looking at a property-free um, paradise, or what they think of as paradise. That would be the goal. So, and that's not going to happen in that we're all individuals, and because we're individuals, we have expectation. Notice I didn't say right. We don't have a right, but we do have an expectation of privacy. And that's what private property is all about. Okay, as a matter of fact, even public property is about that as well. Whether that because public property that may belong to one city means that one city has the right to a certain amount of privacy and not be interfered with by other cities, and that can be applied to counties, countries, etc. So, um, but anyways, game theory is all about manipulation. It's psychological in nature and imaginary. It's got very little to do with actual reality, but it can be a potent force. And you have to, it's good, behooves you to understand and have at least a working knowledge of what game theory is. Because again, when you're dealing with the left, what's most important is not to know what they're saying, but to know what they're doing. And in this particular case, it's blatant, flagrant manipulation. So when we come back, a few jokes from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book. And thank you very much. The New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book is written by Jim Peach, an actual New York City cab driver. And so here we go. Why is it awful to be an egg? 1, you only get laid once. 2, the only one who ever sits on your face is your own mother. 3, it takes 3 minutes to get hard. 4, you come in a box with 11 others. An old retired couple is sitting at their kitchen table and the wife looks at the husband and says, "You know what? I feel like an ice cream. Will you go out and get me an ice cream?" "All right, I'll get you an ice cream," says the man, getting up and putting on his coat. "But I don't want just any ice cream," says the woman. "I want a sundae." "Okay," says the man, "I'll get you a sundae." "But," says the woman, "I don't want just any sundae. I want a banana split." "Do you want me to write this down for you?" "No," says the man, "you want a special sundae, banana split." "Right," she says, "but not just any banana split. I want it to have a scoop of chocolate on one side and a scoop of vanilla on the other. If you want, I'll write this down for you." "I know what you want," says the man. "You want a special sundae, a banana split with a scoop of chocolate here and a scoop of vanilla there." "Yeah," she says, "but I want it to be special. I want to have whipped cream on top. I'll write that down for you." "No, no," says the man. "I know what you want. You want a special sundae, a banana split with a scoop of chocolate here, scoop of vanilla there, and whipped cream on top, right?" "Yeah, but that's not good enough," says the old woman. "I want more. I want them to put some chopped nuts and a cherry on top." "I can write that down." "No, I know what you want," says the old man. "You want a special sundae, banana split with a scoop of chocolate here, a scoop of vanilla there, and some whipped cream, chocolate, chopped nuts, and a cherry on top, right?" "Right," says the woman. 2 hours later, he comes back with a greasy paper bag. He puts it on the kitchen table and stands back. The woman walks over, opens the bag, looks inside, and sees 4 bagels. She looks at him and says, "You forgot the cream cheese." And on that note, we come to the end of another episode of Story Time. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.